The words hung in the air of Principal Margaret Hartford's office like a challenge waiting to be answered. My mom is Delta Force. She protects our country. The statement came from 12-year-old Riley Morrison, whose steady voice contradicted the trembling of her small hands clutched around the straps of her backpack. The girl stood before the principal's massive oak desk, her dark ponytail slightly askew from the cafeteria incident that had brought her here, her green eyes reflecting a combination of defiance and barely contained tears. Principal Hartford, a woman whose 28 years in education had calcified her assumptions about what constituted acceptable behavior and believable family circumstances, leaned back in her leather chair with the kind of condescending smile reserved for children who told obvious lies. "Riley, sweetheart," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "I understand that having a parent deployed overseas can be difficult, but making up elaborate stories about your mother's occupation doesn't help anyone. It only creates more problems." "I am not making it up," Riley insisted, her voice gaining strength despite the way her eyes were beginning to glisten with unshed tears. "My mom really is in special operations. She cannot talk about most of what she does, but she serves our country and she is amazing at her job." The principal's expression hardened into something less sympathetic and more irritated. She had dealt with attention-seeking students before, children who invented dramatic family circumstances to gain sympathy or social status among their peers. This Morrison girl seemed particularly committed to her fiction, which made the situation all the more problematic. "Riley," Margaret said, her voice taking on the firm tone she used when patience had expired. "We called your emergency contact, your Aunt Jennifer, and she confirmed that your mother works as a sales representative for a medical supply company. There is no need to continue this fantasy. What we need to discuss is your behavior in the cafeteria today." The cafeteria incident had begun innocuously enough during lunch period at Riverside Middle School. Riley had been sitting with her usual group of friends when Derek Patterson, an 8th grader known for bullying younger students, had made loud comments about her constantly absent mother. The remarks had started as vague insinuations about neglect and escalated to outright mockery about Riley being abandoned by a parent who clearly did not care enough to attend school functions. Riley had endured the comments with admirable restraint until Derek had crossed a line she could not ignore. "At least my mum has not been to prison like yours," he had announced to the surrounding tables. "Oh wait, your mom does not even exist. You probably made her up because the truth is too embarrassing." The punch that Riley had thrown connected solidly with Derek's jaw, sending him stumbling backward into a lunch tray that distributed spaghetti across 3 tables and 4 students. The cafeteria had erupted into chaos, with students shouting and teachers rushing to separate the combatants before the situation could escalate further. Now, sitting in the principal's office with ice on her bruised knuckles and shame burning in her chest, Riley struggled to explain actions she knew were wrong, but felt entirely justified, given the provocation. "Derek was saying horrible things about my mom," Riley said quietly. "He was lying about her and making everyone laugh like she is a joke. I know I should not have hit him, but he would not stop. Violence is never acceptable," Margaret replied, with the rehearsed firmness of someone who had delivered this speech countless times. "Regardless of what Derek said, your response was completely inappropriate. But what concerns me more than the physical altercation is your continued insistence on this fantasy about your mother's occupation." "It is not a fantasy," Riley protested, her voice breaking slightly. "My mom really is in Delta Force. She's been deployed for 8 months, and before that she spent 2 years training for her current assignment. I know it sounds impossible, but it is the truth. Margaret Hartford had heard many student lies during her career. She had encountered children who claimed their parents were CIA agents, astronauts training for Mars missions, and secret millionaires living undercover in suburban neighborhoods. In every case, the truth had been far more mundane and often more painful. Parents in prison, parents who had abandoned their families, parents struggling with addiction or mental illness. The Morrison girls' situation fit the pattern perfectly. According to the school records, Riley lived with her aunt, Jennifer Morrison, a registered nurse who worked at Riverside General Hospital. The mother, Captain Sarah Morrison, was listed as military, deployed overseas, with Jennifer serving as legal guardian during the deployment. The setup suggested a single parent who had joined the military for stable income and benefits, probably serving in some administrative or support role that required extended overseas assignments. The idea that this absent mother might actually be part of Delta Force, one of the most elite and secretive military units in existence, struck Margaret as absurd. Delta Force operators were the stuff of action movies and video games, not the reality of middle-class families in suburban Ohio. "Riley," Margaret said, softening her tone slightly, "I spoke with your aunt this morning after the cafeteria incident. She expressed concern about your recent behavior and agreed that we need to address these fantasy stories before they become more problematic. She also mentioned that you have been having difficulty adjusting to your mother's extended absence." The words hit Riley like a betrayal. Aunt Jennifer had promised to keep her mother's real occupation confidential, had sworn that she understood the importance of operational security. But apparently, when faced with school authorities questioning Riley's truthfulness, her aunt had chosen the easier path of reinforcing the cover story rather than defending her niece's honesty. "My aunt has to say that," Riley tried to explain, her voice desperate now. "Mom's work is classified. Nobody is supposed to know the real details. Aunt Jennifer is protecting operational security by maintaining the cover story." Margaret sighed with the exasperation of someone whose patience had been thoroughly exhausted. "This is exactly the kind of elaborate rationalization that concerns me. You have created an entire mythology around your mother's absence, complete with explanations for why nobody can confirm your story. This level of fantasy indicates deeper emotional issues that need professional attention." She pulled a folder from her desk drawer and opened it to reveal several printed documents. "Over the past 3 months, you have told classmates that your mother has been to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several other locations you refuse to name for security reasons. You have claimed she knows 7 languages, has advanced training in demolitions and tactical operations, and has participated in missions that saved countless lives." "That is all true," Riley whispered, though her conviction was beginning to waver under the relentless skepticism. "Riley, no 12-year-old's mother does all those things." Margaret's voice carried the finality of someone delivering an unwelcome diagnosis. "What you are describing is a character from a video game or movie, not a real person. And more importantly, your insistence on these stories is affecting your relationships with other students and your overall adjustment to school life." The principal leaned forward, her expression shifting from irritation to something that might have been genuine concern. "I want to help you, Riley, but I cannot do that if you continue refusing to acknowledge reality. Your aunt has agreed to arrange counseling sessions to help you process your feelings about your mother's absence in healthier ways." "I do not need counseling," Riley said, though tears were now streaming down her cheeks despite her efforts to maintain composure. "I need people to believe me. My mom is coming home in 3 weeks for a short leave. She will tell you herself what she does." Margaret shook her head slowly. "Given the severity of today's incident and your continued behavioral issues, I'm afraid we need to take more immediate action. I'm suspending you for 5 days for the physical altercation in the cafeteria. During that suspension, you will meet with the school counselor to address these fantasy stories and develop healthier coping strategies. You cannot suspend me for telling the truth." Riley protested, her voice rising with a combination of anger and desperation. "I am suspending you for punching another student," Margaret corrected firmly. "The fantasy stories are a separate issue that requires intervention. Your aunt will be here shortly to pick you up. I suggest you use the suspension period to think seriously about the consequences of continuing down this path." As Riley sat in the outer office waiting for her aunt to arrive, she clutched her phone with hands that had stopped trembling and started clenching with frustrated anger. She wanted desperately to call her mother, to hear Captain Sarah Morrison's steady voice assuring her that everything would be fine. But her mom's current deployment made communication impossible except for scheduled calls twice monthly, and the next call was not for another 6 days. The door opened, and Aunt Jennifer entered with the harried expression of someone who had left work early to deal with an unexpected crisis. At 38, Jennifer Morrison bore a strong resemblance to her older sister Sarah, the same dark hair and green eyes, the same strong jawline that suggested determination and strength. But where Sarah moved with the controlled precision of someone trained in combat, Jennifer carried herself with the practical efficiency of a healthcare professional accustomed to managing chaos. "Riley," Jennifer said quietly, her voice carefully neutral, "let us go home." The drive to Jennifer's house passed in uncomfortable silence. Riley stared out the window at familiar neighborhoods that suddenly felt alien and hostile. She had lived with her aunt for most of the past 3 years, ever since her mother's career had shifted from regular army assignments to something far more demanding and secretive. Sarah Morrison had joined the military at 18, driven by a combination of patriotic duty and limited economic opportunities in their small hometown. She had excelled in basic training, discovered an aptitude for tactical thinking and physical challenges that surprised even her own expectations. Over 20 years, she had risen through ranks, earned multiple commendations, and eventually caught the attention of recruiters looking for exceptional soldiers to undergo selection for Special Operations Forces. Delta Force selection was notorious for its difficulty. Out of every 100 candidates who attempted the program, fewer than 10 completed it successfully. The training required not just physical endurance, but mental resilience, tactical brilliance, and the kind of adaptability that could not be taught in conventional military schools. Sarah Morrison had been one of only 3 women ever to complete the selection process and earn a place in one of the most elite military units in the world. But such achievement came with costs. The training had been brutal, separating her from her daughter for months at a time. The deployments were frequent and dangerous, often to locations she could not name, for missions she could not discuss. Riley had learned to accept her mother's absences, had grown accustomed to the careful vagueness that surrounded Sarah's work, had developed resilience that most children never needed. What she had not developed was the ability to lie convincingly about her pride in her mother's accomplishments. And that failure had now resulted in suspension and forced counseling for refusing to deny reality. Inside Jennifer's comfortable suburban home, aunt and niece finally broke their silence. Riley collapsed onto the living room couch, while Jennifer made tea with the automatic movements of someone buying time to organize difficult thoughts. "Riley," Jennifer began carefully, settling into the chair across from her niece. "I know you are angry with me for not defending you to Principal Hartford, but you have to understand the position I am in. You promised you would not lie about Mom," Riley said, her voice thick with betrayal. "You promised you understood how important her work is." "I do understand," Jennifer replied, "but I also have to protect you. If I had told Principal Hartford the truth about your mother's occupation, it would have created more problems than it solved. People do not believe that women serve in Delta Force. They certainly do not believe it about someone they see as just another single mom trying to make ends meet. So I am supposed to let everyone think Mom abandoned me, that she does not care enough to come to my school events or be involved in my life." The accusation hit Jennifer hard because it contained uncomfortable truth. Sarah's absences did create Exactly those impressions among people who did not understand the reality of her service. Teachers had made assumptions about neglect, other parents had whispered about poor parenting choices, and students had used Riley's family situation as ammunition for bullying. "Your mother loves you more than anything in the world," Jennifer said firmly. "Everything she does, every mission she undertakes, is motivated by her desire to make the world safer for you and millions of other children. She is a hero, Riley. But sometimes being related to heroes means carrying burdens that other people would not understand." "That is not fair," Riley whispered. "No," Jennifer agreed, "it is not fair at all. But it is reality. Your mother has spent 20 years earning the right to serve at the highest levels of military special operations. She cannot defend herself against school administrators who think she is just another absent parent. So we have to be smart about how we handle situations like this. Being smart means letting people think I am a liar. Being smart means picking battles we can win," Jennifer corrected gently. "Principal Hartford has already made up her mind about your mother's occupation. Nothing you say will change her opinion because she has no framework for understanding what your mom actually does. Fighting her on this will only make your life harder." Riley wanted to argue, wanted to insist that truth mattered more than convenience. But she was 12 years old, exhausted from months of defending her mother against skepticism and mockery, and suddenly overwhelmed by the unfairness of a situation she had never asked to be in. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked quietly. "Just let people believe whatever they want about Mom. For now, yes," Jennifer said. "Your mother will be home in 3 weeks. When she arrives, we can address this situation properly. But until then, you need to focus on getting through your suspension and returning to school without creating more conflicts." The counseling sessions began 2 days later in the office of Dr. Patricia Chen, a school psychologist who specialized in children dealing with family disruption and behavioral issues. Patricia's office was designed to put young clients at ease, filled with comfortable furniture, soothing colors, and carefully selected artwork that suggested safety and understanding. "Riley," Patricia began their first session, "I want you to know that this is a safe space. Whatever you tell me stays confidential unless I believe you are in danger of hurting yourself or others. My job is not to judge you, but to help you develop healthier ways of coping with difficult emotions." "I do not need coping strategies," Riley replied, her arms crossed defensively. "I need people to believe me when I tell the truth." Patricia had reviewed Riley's file before the session, noting the pattern of behavioral issues, academic struggles, and what Principal Hartford had characterized as persistent fantasy stories about her mother's occupation. The psychologist recognized the classic signs of a child struggling with parental absence, creating elaborate narratives to cope with feelings of abandonment and loss. "Tell me about your mother," Patricia invited gently. "What is she like when she is home?" Riley's defensive posture softened slightly at the question. "When Mom is home, she is amazing. She makes me breakfast every morning, helps with my homework, even though she is usually exhausted, and we watch old movies together on weekends. She teaches me stuff about survival skills and self-defense, not because she wants me to be a soldier, but because she wants me to be strong and capable." The details were touching, painting a picture of a devoted parent who valued time with her daughter despite demanding professional obligations. But they also fit the pattern Patricia had seen in other cases where children idealized absent parents, creating perfect versions that contrasted sharply with the abandonment they felt. "Your mother sounds wonderful," Patricia said warmly. "It must be very hard when she has to be away for long periods." "It is hard," Riley admitted, "but I understand why she has to go. Her work is important. She protects people who cannot protect themselves. She stops bad people from hurting innocent families. And you believe she does this as part of Delta Force?" Patricia asked carefully. "I do not believe it," Riley said with sudden intensity. "I know it. I have seen her gear, her medals, the letters from commanding officers. I know the names of team members she has trained with. This is not something I made up. It is real." Patricia made notes while maintaining an expression of neutral interest. The level of detail in Riley's fantasy was impressive, suggesting either extensive research or a very active imagination. Children dealing with deployment often created elaborate stories about their parents' military service, transforming routine jobs into heroic missions as a way of making sense of long absences. "Riley," Patricia said gently, "sometimes when people we love are far away, we create stories that help us feel connected to them. These stories are not lies exactly. They are more like coping mechanisms that protect us from painful feelings of loss or abandonment." "My mom is not far away because she abandoned me," Riley protested. "She is far away because her country needs her skills and experience." "There is a difference. Of course there is," Patricia agreed. "But the feeling of loss can be similar, regardless of the reason for absence. And sometimes we deal with that loss by creating narratives that make the absence feel more meaningful or important." The session continued for 50 minutes, with Patricia gently probing Riley's perceptions of her mother's work while carefully steering the conversation toward acknowledging the possibility that reality might differ from the narrative Riley had constructed. By the end, the psychologist had formed a clear diagnosis. Riley Morrison was a bright, articulate young girl struggling with complicated feelings about parental absence, expressing those feelings through elaborate fantasy stories that provided both explanation and emotional protection. The recommendation Patricia provided to Principal Hartford was straightforward. Continue counseling sessions, encourage Riley to distinguish between fantasy and reality, and work with Aunt Jennifer to help the child develop more grounded understanding of her mother's actual occupation and circumstances. What none of them knew was that Captain Sarah Morrison's current mission was approaching its conclusion. In a compound 7,000 miles away, Delta Force operators were preparing for extraction after weeks of intelligence gathering that would dismantle a terrorist network responsible for attacks across 3 continents. The mission had been dangerous, requiring skills and courage that few people possessed and fewer still could understand. Sarah Morrison had performed flawlessly under conditions that would have broken most people. She had gathered critical intelligence, neutralized threats, and ensured her team's safety through careful planning and exceptional execution. In 2 weeks, she would return to the United States as a decorated soldier whose contributions had saved countless lives. But in the mind of Principal Margaret Hartford, Dr. Patricia Chen, and most of Riverside Middle School, she remained a sales representative whose daughter told disturbing fantasy stories to cope with maternal neglect. Riley's suspension passed slowly. She spent her days reading, practicing the self-defense moves her mother had taught her, and trying not to think about returning to school, where everyone now knew she had been suspended for fighting and lying. Aunt Jennifer took time off work to stay with her, their relationship strained by Riley's anger over what she saw as betrayal during the principal's office meeting. On the 4th day of suspension, Riley received an unexpected email from her mother. Communications during deployments were strictly limited, usually brief messages confirming safety and expressing love without providing any operational details. But this message was different, longer and more personal than usual. "Dear Riley," it began, "I know you are going through difficult times right now. Aunt Jennifer told me about the incident at school and the trouble you are having with people not believing you about my work. I'm so sorry that my career creates these complications for you. You deserve better than having to defend me against skepticism and doubt. I want you to know that everything you have told people about my job is true. I'm part of Delta Force. I do serve in special operations. The missions I undertake are dangerous and important, and I'm proud of the work I do to protect our country and make the world safer for people like you. But I also want you to understand something important. The secrecy that surrounds my work is not just about protecting operational security. It is also about protecting you. The less people know about what I really do, the safer you are from potential threats or complications that could arise from my enemies knowing about my family. So when people do not believe you, when they think you are making up stories or engaging in fantasy, please understand that their disbelief is actually serving a purpose. It keeps you safe by maintaining the cover story that protects our family from attention we do not want or need. I know this is hard. I know it feels unfair that you cannot openly celebrate the things I do or share your pride in my accomplishments. But I promise you that in 2 weeks when I come home, we will sit down together and figure out how to handle this situation better. We will talk to your principal and your counselor and anyone else who needs to understand that truth is more complicated than they realize. Until then, please be patient, be strong, and know that I love you more than anything in the world. Everything I do, every mission I accept, every risk I take is motivated by my desire to make the world better and safer for you. Stay strong, my brave girl. I will see you soon. Love, Mom. Riley read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed her mother's words. The validation felt like oxygen after drowning. Confirmation that she had not been crazy or delusional, but simply ahead of adults who could not imagine the reality she knew to be true. She showed the email to Aunt Jennifer, who read it with an expression that combined relief and concern. "This helps," Jennifer said carefully. "But you understand that we still cannot share this with Principal Hartford or Dr. Chen. Your mother's work requires discretion." "I understand," Riley said. "But Mom said when she gets home, we are going to talk to them together. She is going to make them understand." Jennifer nodded, though privately she worried about how such a conversation would unfold. Military special operations personnel rarely revealed their true occupations to civilian authorities, and even when they did, proving such claims without compromising security was nearly impossible. Riley Morrison might be one of the most capable soldiers in American history, but that did not mean she could convince skeptical school administrators, who had already decided her daughter was a troubled child in need of psychological intervention. Riley returned to school the following Monday with renewed determination. She had decided to follow her mother's advice, allowing people to believe what they wanted while maintaining private certainty about the truth. But reality proved more difficult than resolution. The cafeteria incident had made her notorious. Students whispered as she walked through hallways, some with sympathy, others with mockery. Derek Patterson, sporting a bruise on his jaw that had become a badge of honor among certain social groups, made pointed comments about crazy girls who could not handle jokes. Teachers watched her with the careful attention reserved for students flagged as behavioral problems, and through it all, Riley carried the secret knowledge that in less than 2 weeks, everything would change. Her mother would return, would walk through Riverside Middle School's front doors with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced far greater challenges than skeptical educators, and would set the record straight in ways that would make everyone who doubted feel foolish for their assumptions. What Riley could not know was that Captain Sarah Morrison's return would unfold in ways none of them could predict, bringing with it consequences that would transform not just her daughter's life, but the entire understanding of what service and sacrifice meant in communities that had never really confronted such realities. The final day of Riley's counseling sessions with Dr. Chen arrived with the weight of expectations neither participant fully understood. Patricia had spent 2 weeks working with Riley, gently encouraging the girl to distinguish between fantasy and reality, between the mother she wanted and the mother who actually existed. Riley had participated politely, while internally maintaining absolute certainty about truths the psychologist could not accept. Riley, Patricia began their final session. I want to talk about healthy versus unhealthy coping mechanisms. When we create elaborate fantasies about our parents' lives, we might feel better temporarily. But ultimately, those fantasies prevent us from processing real emotions and developing genuine resilience. What if they are not fantasies? Riley asked quietly. What if everything I have said is true, but people just cannot accept it because it does not fit their expectations? The question was more sophisticated than Patricia had anticipated from a 12-year-old, suggesting an intelligence that went beyond the behavioral problems documented in Riley's file. But sophisticated questions did not change the fundamental assessment. The story Riley insisted on was simply too improbable to be real. Riley, truthfully, women do not serve in Delta Force combat roles. The physical requirements alone make it nearly impossible, and the military has only recently begun opening some special operations positions to women. Your mother might be an exceptional soldier, but what you are describing goes beyond exceptional into the realm of fantasy. My mom completed Delta Force selection 3 years ago, Riley said with the careful precision of someone reciting facts rather than stories. She was one of 3 women to ever do so. The training took 18 months. She nearly died twice during exercises. She learned 7 languages, 6 of them to fluency. She has served in 16 countries on missions she cannot discuss. These are not fantasies. These are facts. Patricia made notes while maintaining her expression of patient concern. The level of detail was remarkable, suggesting Riley had done extensive research to support her narrative. But research and reality were different things. When your mother comes home, we can certainly invite her to meet with me and Principal Hartford to discuss her actual occupation, Patricia offered diplomatically. That conversation might help clarify some of the confusion and allow us to move forward with more accurate information. She will be home in 10 days, Riley said. And yes, she plans to come to the school and talk to everyone who thinks I have been lying. The prediction was delivered with such confidence that Patricia felt a flicker of doubt. What if, against all probability, there was substance to Riley's claims? What if this child had been telling a truth so improbable that adult skepticism had dismissed it out of hand? But no, Patricia told herself firmly. That way lay the abandonment of professional judgment. Riley Morrison was a troubled child coping with parental absence through elaborate fantasy. The kind intervention required was helping her accept reality, not indulging impossible stories that prevented healthy emotional development. I look forward to meeting your mother, Patricia said warmly. In the meantime, I want you to continue practicing the coping strategies we have discussed. When you feel the urge to elaborate on your mother's occupation, try to redirect that energy into journaling or art or other creative outlets that process emotion without creating conflict with others. Riley nodded with the false compliance of someone who had learned that arguing with adults in authority positions accomplished nothing. She would smile, agree, and wait for her mother to arrive, and prove everyone wrong in ways that would be both satisfying and overwhelming. The counseling session concluded with Patricia providing a positive report to Principal Hartford. Riley Morrison had made progress in understanding the difference between fantasy and reality. She had agreed to redirect her coping mechanisms into healthier channels. She was ready to return to regular school activities with appropriate behavioral monitoring. Margaret Hartford filed the report with satisfaction. Another troubled student had been successfully guided toward better adjustment through proper intervention. The Morrison girl would hopefully abandon her elaborate fantasy stories and accept the reality of her family situation. If she continued having problems, more intensive therapy options could be explored. But for now, the situation appeared to be under control. Neither woman could have imagined that in 9 days, a Black Hawk helicopter would land on the Riverside Middle School athletic field, carrying a woman whose presence would shatter every assumption they had made about reality, possibility, and the price of service in ways that would make their careful interventions seem almost criminally naive. But for now, Riley Morrison returned to her classes, endured the whispers and speculation, and counted down the days until her mother came home to set the record straight. She had no idea that Captain Sarah Morrison's return would bring not just validation, but revelation. Not just vindication, but transformation that would ripple through Riverside Middle School and beyond, in ways no 12-year-old could anticipate or control. The waiting was almost over, and when it ended, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The morning of Captain Sarah Morrison's return arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made everything feel sharper and more real. Riley had barely slept, her excitement and nervousness creating a restless energy that made sitting still impossible. She had chosen her outfit carefully, wanting to look presentable when her mother arrived at school to finally set the record straight. Aunt Jennifer drove Riley to Riverside Middle School with unusual silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel with tension that suggested she shared Riley's anticipation. Sarah had called the previous evening, confirming her arrival time and requesting a meeting with Principal Hartford and Dr. Chen at 11 o'clock. Jennifer had arranged the meeting, carefully avoiding any details about Sarah's actual occupation, simply stating that Captain Morrison wished to address concerns about her daughter's school adjustment. Margaret Hartford prepared for the meeting with a mixture of professional duty and personal irritation. She had dealt with difficult parents before, people who refused to accept their children's behavioral problems and blamed school authorities for issues that originated at home. This Morrison woman was probably going to be defensive about her prolonged absence, making excuses for her daughter's violent outburst and persistent fantasy stories. At 10:45, Principal Hartford, Dr. Chen, and Aunt Jennifer gathered in the school conference room. Riley had been allowed to skip her morning classes to attend, sitting nervously beside her aunt while the adults made small talk about weather and traffic patterns. Through the window, they could see the front parking lot, where parents dropped off students and staff members came and went with the casual routine of a normal school day. At 10:57, the sound reached them first. A deep rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, growing louder with each passing second. Students in nearby classrooms abandoned their lessons to press against windows, pointing at the sky with excitement and confusion. Teachers stepped into hallways, looking around with bewilderment as the sound intensified into something that made the building's windows rattle in their frames. And then it appeared. The Black Hawk helicopter descended over Riverside Middle School like something from a movie, its powerful rotors creating wind that bent trees and sent loose papers swirling across the parking lot. It was not alone. 2 more helicopters flanked it, their presence transforming the suburban school into something resembling a military operations zone. Margaret Hartford stood frozen at the conference room window, her mouth open in disbelief as the lead helicopter settled onto the athletic field with practiced precision. The side door opened before the rotors had fully stopped, and a figure emerged that made Riley's heart nearly explode with joy. Captain Sarah Morrison stepped onto the grass in full-dress uniform, her decorations catching sunlight as she moved with the controlled grace of someone trained for situations far more dangerous than school meetings. She was not alone. Behind her, 6 more soldiers emerged from the helicopters, all in dress uniform, all moving with the same purposeful efficiency that marked elite military personnel. "Mom," Riley breathed, pressing her hands against the conference room window as tears streamed down her face. Sarah Morrison walked toward the school building with her team flanking her in formation. Students who had rushed outside to see the helicopters parted instinctively, sensing that these were not people to be approached casually. Teachers stood aside as the group entered through the main doors, their boots echoing in hallways that had suddenly gone completely silent. Principal Hartford felt her certainty crumbling as the soldiers approached the conference room. This could not be real. Women did not serve in Delta Force. Middle-class families from suburban Ohio did not produce elite special operations soldiers. The Morrison girls' stories had been fantasy, elaborate coping mechanisms created by a troubled child, except apparently they had not been fantasy at all. The conference room door opened, and Captain Sarah Morrison entered with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced far greater challenges than skeptical school administrators. At 42, she carried herself with the bearing of a combat veteran, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, her green eyes sharp with intelligence that missed nothing. The soldiers who accompanied her remained in the hallway, their presence a silent testament to the truth Riley had been telling all along. "Principal Hartford," Sarah said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made Margaret automatically straighten her posture. "I'm Captain Sarah Morrison, United States Army Special Operations. I understand you have had concerns about my daughter's credibility regarding my occupation. Margaret began, then stopped, completely unable to formulate a response to this impossible situation. Sarah turned to Riley, her professional demeanor softening into pure maternal warmth. "Hi, baby. I'm sorry I could not get here sooner." Riley launched herself at her mother, with the pent-up emotion of months of separation and weeks of being called a liar. Sarah caught her daughter easily, holding her tight while maintaining eye contact with the adults who had dismissed Riley's truth as fantasy. "Dr. Chen," Sarah continued, still holding Riley, "I understand you have been providing counseling to my daughter under the assumption that her statements about my career were elaborate fantasy stories, created to cope with maternal absence." "Patricia." Chen felt heat rising in her face as professional certainty transformed into professional embarrassment. "Captain Morrison, I apologize. We had no way of knowing. Your daughter's claims seemed impossible given what we understood about military service and family circumstances." "My daughter told you the truth," Sarah replied firmly, but without anger. "She told you repeatedly that I serve in special operations, that my work is classified, that my absences are due to national security obligations. And instead of believing her, you suspended her, forced her into counseling, and treated her honest statements as evidence of psychological problems." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, making everyone in the room acutely aware of how badly they had failed Riley Morrison. Margaret Hartford wanted to defend her decisions, to explain that the circumstances had seemed to warrant intervention. But faced with this woman whose uniform bore decorations that spoke of valor and sacrifice, most people could not imagine. All defenses felt hollow and inadequate. "Principal Hartford," Sarah continued, turning her full attention to the woman who had suspended her daughter. "Riley punched another student because he was mocking her family and calling her a liar. She defended my honor and her own truthfulness in the only way she knew how. Was her response perfect? No, should she face some consequences for physical violence, perhaps? But to suspend her for 5 days while simultaneously forcing her into counseling designed to make her deny reality crosses a line that I cannot accept." Margaret found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Captain Morrison, we had no way of verifying your daughter's claims. In our experience, such elaborate stories usually indicate deeper issues that need addressing." "In your experience," Sarah replied, her tone sharpening slightly, "children from military families are probably accustomed to having their realities questioned by people who have never served and cannot imagine the sacrifices service requires. But lacking imagination is not the same as encountering impossibility. My daughter told you the truth. Your failure to believe her reflects your limitations, not hers." The words landed like precision strikes, each one exposing assumptions and prejudices that Margaret had never examined. She had dismissed Riley's claims because they did not fit her understanding of military service, family structure, or the capabilities of women in combat. She had failed Riley Morrison not through malice, but through an inability to accept truths that challenged comfortable assumptions. "What happens now?" Jennifer asked quietly, breaking the heavy silence. Sarah looked at her sister with appreciation for the question. Now, several things happen. First, Riley's suspension is removed from her record completely. Second, she receives a formal apology from this school for treating her honesty as evidence of psychological problems. Third, we establish clear protocols for how this school handles students from military families so that no other child faces what my daughter has endured. And if we refuse? Margaret asked, though the question came from wounded pride rather than genuine resistance. Sarah's expression hardened into something that reminded everyone she was not just a mother, but a soldier trained in ways most people never encountered. Then I contact the Department of Defense Education Liaison, the State Board of Education, and every media outlet in Ohio to explain how Riverside Middle School systematically bullied a military dependent for telling the truth about her parents' service. I imagine that conversation would be uncomfortable for everyone involved. The threat was delivered calmly, but with absolute conviction. Margaret understood that Captain Morrison was not bluffing. This woman had faced enemies far more dangerous than school administrators. She would not hesitate to use every resource available to protect her daughter and ensure no other military child faced similar treatment. "That will not be necessary," Margaret said quickly. "We will remove the suspension and provide appropriate apologies. I genuinely regret that Riley was not believed when she told us the truth." Sarah studied the principal for a long moment, assessing sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "I appreciate that, Principal Hartford, and I hope you understand that my daughter's experiences here, while painful, have taught important lessons about the gap between military and civilian understanding." She turned to Dr. Chen, who had remained silent during the exchange. "Dr. Chen, I understand you were doing your job as you understood it. But I want you to know that my daughter does not need counseling to cope with fantasy stories. What she needs is support from adults who believe her when she tells the truth, even when that truth seems improbable." Patricia nodded, her professional pride thoroughly humbled. "I understand, Captain Morrison, and I apologize to Riley for not taking her statement seriously. She deserves better from the adults in her life." The meeting concluded with arrangements for Riley to return to regular classes immediately. With a written statement from Principal Hartford acknowledging that the suspension had been issued based on incomplete information and was being fully rescinded. Sarah spent another hour at the school, meeting with Riley's teachers and establishing relationships that would ensure her daughter received appropriate support. During future deployments, the helicopters remained on the athletic field throughout the visit, their presence transforming Riverside Middle School into the center of community attention. Local news crews arrived, drawn by reports of military aircraft landing at a suburban school. Students and parents gathered at the fence line, taking photos and speculating about what was happening. When Sarah finally prepared to leave, she walked with Riley through hallways lined with students who now looked at the girl with new respect and understanding. Derek Patterson, the 8th grader whose mockery had triggered the cafeteria incident, stood with his friends near the main entrance. When he saw Captain Morrison approaching, he straightened unconsciously. Responding to the authority she radiated, even without saying a word, Sarah stopped in front of Derek, studying him with the assessment of someone trained to evaluate threats and weaknesses. "You are the young man who was making comments about my daughter and our family," she stated rather than asked. Derek swallowed hard, suddenly very aware that he had been mocking the daughter of someone considerably more formidable than he had imagined. "Yes, ma'am," he managed. "My daughter tells me you suggested I do not exist, that she made me up because the truth was too embarrassing," Sarah continued. "I hope my presence here today corrects that misunderstanding." "Yes, ma'am," Derek repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good," Sarah said, "because I want you to understand something. Riley has spent months dealing with my absences, worrying about my safety, and carrying the burden of knowing what I do without being able to share that knowledge with most people. She does not need classmates adding to that burden by questioning whether I exist or care about her. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Sarah studied him a moment longer, then nodded. Apology accepted. Now go to class and remember that everyone you meet is carrying burdens you cannot see. Show them kindness instead of mockery. As they walked toward the waiting helicopter, Riley felt something shift inside her. The validation was profound, the vindication sweet. But more than that, she felt seen in ways she had not been for months. Her mother had not just defended her. She had demonstrated through presence and action that Riley's truth mattered, that military families deserved respect and understanding, that children should not have to prove their parents' worth to skeptical adults. The helicopter lifted off, with Sarah and her team aboard, rising above Riverside Middle School in a display that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Riley stood in the athletic field watching until the aircraft disappeared into the distance, knowing that her mother was returning to service, but also knowing that everything had changed. Principal Hartford stood at her office window, watching the helicopters fade from view. She had been an educator for nearly 3 decades, had dealt with countless family situations and student challenges. But she had never encountered anything like Captain Sarah Morrison, and had never felt quite so thoroughly educated about her own limitations and assumptions. The next morning, Riley returned to school to find her suspension formally removed from all records. Principal Hartford had issued a school-wide memo about respecting military families and avoiding assumptions about student circumstances. Dr. Chen had requested permission to develop new protocols for supporting children of deployed service members, but more significantly, Riley found that her classmates looked at her differently now. The girl who had been mocked for having an absent mother was now known as the daughter of a genuine hero. Students who had avoided her after the cafeteria incident now approached with questions about what Delta Force actually did. Teachers who had watched her with concern now offered support that acknowledged the unique challenges of military family life. Derek Patterson approached her during lunch period, his friends notably absent. "I wanted to apologize again," he said awkwardly, "for what I said about your mom." "I did not know. You did not have to know," Riley replied quietly. "You just had to not be mean about things you did not understand." The simple statement carried wisdom beyond her years, reflecting lessons learned through months of defending truth against skepticism. Derek nodded, accepting the rebuke, and walked away with what Riley hoped was new understanding about the cost of casual cruelty. That evening, Riley video called her mother, who had returned to base pending her next assignment. The conversation covered school, friends, and the aftermath of Sarah's dramatic appearance. "Mom," Riley asked toward the end of their call, "do you think things will be better now? At school, I mean." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think people understand better now. They know that military families face challenges civilian families might not encounter. They know that service members come in forms they might not expect. And they know that you were telling the truth all along, but will they believe me next time? When you deploy again and people wonder where you are?" "They should," Sarah replied. "And if they do not, you have allies now who understand your situation. Principal Hartford, Dr. Chen, your teachers, they all learned important lessons about assumptions and evidence. That should make the next deployment easier." "I missed you so much," Riley said quietly. "I know, baby. I missed you too, but you were so brave. You defended our family, even when everyone was telling you that you were wrong. That takes courage most adults do not have." The conversation ended with mutual expressions of love and promises to talk again soon. Riley logged off feeling more settled than she had in months. The validation had been profound, the vindication complete. But more than that, she felt acknowledged in ways that went beyond simply being believed. Weeks turned into months. Sarah completed her current service obligation and began training for new missions. Riley continued excelling academically while developing advocacy for military families at her school. The helicopters became local legend, the story repeated and embellished until Captain Morrison's arrival took on mythic proportions. But for those who had been present that October morning, who had witnessed the moment when assumption met reality and reality won decisively. The memory remained sharp and instructive. They had learned that truth sometimes looks impossible until it lands on your athletic field in a Black Hawk helicopter. They had learned that service takes forms beyond civilian imagination. And they had learned that believing children when they tell you the truth about their families is not just good policy but basic decency. Riley Morrison never forgot the feeling of being dismissed and disbelieved by adults she had trusted. But she also never forgot the vindication of watching her mother step off that helicopter in full dress uniform, transforming impossible claims into undeniable reality. Both experiences shaped her understanding of truth, power, and the importance of standing firm, even when everyone around you insists you are wrong. Years later, when Riley herself entered military service, following her mother's path towards special operations, she would carry those lessons forward. And when she encountered young people struggling to be heard or believed, she would remember the principal who had suspended her for telling the truth, and the mother who had landed a helicopter to prove that daughter right. Some truths cannot be dismissed. Some realities cannot be denied. And some parents will move heaven and earth, or at least fly a Black Hawk across Ohio, to defend their children against the casual cruelty of skepticism unearned and assumptions unexamined.